The crystal pitcher hit the dining room wall 6 inches from my head, and my son-in-law smiled when the glass landed around my chair. He thought fear would make me hand him everything. What he did not understand was that I had already spent 2 months preparing for this exact moment. I am Walter. I am 71 years old. For most of my working life, I ran a small construction company in central Oklahoma, the kind of business built on handshakes, correct measurements, and showing up when you said you would. My wife Pearl and I raised our daughter in the house we bought the year we married, a 2-story on a quiet street with a live oak in the backyard, and a kitchen that smelled of rosemary and coffee every morning until the morning it stopped. Pearl passed 4 years before any of this happened. Pancreatic cancer, quick and brutal, the way that particular disease tends to be. She was gone in 7 months, and I rattled around inside that house for 2 years, trying to remember how to cook for one person and failing at it every single time. When my daughter Renata and her husband Craig told me they were struggling financially, I said yes before they finished explaining the situation. Craig's investment firm had suffered what he called a temporary cash flow problem. They needed somewhere to stay while he sorted it out. That was 14 months before the pitcher hit the wall. In those 14 months, I watched my daughter become someone I barely recognized. She had always been confident, opinionated, the kind of woman who walked into a room and immediately rearranged the furniture in her mind, then told you exactly why her version was better. Pearl used to say Renata had inherited my stubbornness without the patience to go with it, which she meant as a compliment. But somewhere in those 14 months, that woman disappeared. She started finishing her sentences differently, depending on whether Craig was in the room. She checked her phone and then checked his face. She laughed at the right times, with the hollow, precise timing of someone who has learned that laughing too late or too early carries consequences. I noticed. I told myself she was a grown woman managing a difficult period in her marriage. I told myself it was not my place. I was wrong on both counts. Craig began talking about my age 6 months after moving in. Not loudly, not cruelly at first. He said it the way a man says something he has rehearsed, gently, with concern arranged carefully across his face, always in front of other people. Pop's memory isn't quite what it was. He shouldn't be handling so much on his own at his age. We're only trying to protect him. He had started calling me Pop without being invited to. My 8-year-old grandson Oliver once asked me why Craig used that name. Only special people get to use it, I told him. Oliver thought about it and said, then he shouldn't. I did not argue with the boy. Behind closed doors, Craig's concern evaporated. He told me the house was too much for one man. He told me I was a burden on Renata. He told me that reasonable people accepted help when it was offered, and that unreasonable people ended up alone and confused in facilities where no one visited. He said those things in the kitchen, in the hallway, standing in the doorway of the room where Pearl had died, as if none of those walls held any weight. The money began disappearing 6 months after they moved in. Small amounts at first, $800, $1,200. Gone from accounts I had kept steady for 2 decades. I did not notice immediately, then the amounts grew. $10,000. $25,000. Labeled in the transaction records as consulting, property maintenance, and medical planning, none of it had come near me.
I found the first account by accident.
Craig used my home computer one afternoon and left a banking tab open. The second account appeared on a payment confirmation he left sitting in the printer tray. He was careful in many ways, but he was the kind of man who had never expected to be caught, and that breeds a particular kind of carelessness. I did not touch the money. I did not say a word. I photographed everything and called Garrick. Garrick Norwell had handled legal work for my construction company for more than 30 years. He was calm, patient, and thorough in the way that only matters when things get difficult, which is when it matters most. When I told him what I had found, he told me to start a folder. I bought a thick manila envelope and began filling it in the basement behind the old furnace beside the green filing cabinet Pearl had spent 15 years asking me to throw away. bank statements, photographs of screen captures, printed confirmation of transfers, and then, 6 weeks before the picture hit the wall, I found the thing that changed everything. Craig's briefcase was in the hallway while he showered. I was not snooping. I had gone to move it off the rug before Oliver tripped over it in the morning. The latch was open. Inside was a quitclaim deed transferring my house to a holding company registered in Craig's name. At the bottom of the page was my signature. I had never signed it. Someone had pressed my name lightly in pencil first, leaving a guide that could be traced in ink. The deed was dated 3 months earlier, long before Craig had said a single word about managing my estate. Long before he had used phrases like family security or simplified ownership. He had been planning this from before the boxes arrived. I took the document to the basement, photographed every page, replaced it exactly as I had found it, and called Garrick the following morning. Garrick said, "Now we move from documenting to building." I asked him what that meant. "It means," he said, "that the folder you have been filling is about to become useful." I also bought a small digital recorder. Garrick told me to leave it running whenever Craig used my study, which he often did for private phone calls, apparently under the impression that a 71-year-old man had no interest in what happened behind partially closed doors. One afternoon, Craig came into the study while I was sorting invoices. He placed his phone on speaker without acknowledging me and called his brother. I kept my eyes on the invoices. I kept the recorder running beneath a stack of papers on the left side of the desk. Craig's voice recorded clearly. "The old man is mostly gone upstairs. We just have to stay patient. Once the house is ours, the rest is straightforward." His brother laughed and asked about Renata. Craig answered, "She does what I tell her, and if she becomes a problem later, I will handle her too." I turned the page in front of me. My hands were steady. I had needed to be sure whether my daughter was his partner or his next casualty. The recording answered that question, and it was not the answer I had hoped for. She was not planning alongside him. She was being managed the same way he managed everyone, through small pressures as applied consistently until resistance became too costly to sustain. The situation had changed. I was no longer protecting only my house. I was protecting my daughter from a man who had already decided she was temporary, and I was protecting the 8-year-old boy sleeping one floor above a person who described people as problems to be handled. Oliver slept at a friend's house the night Craig threw the pitcher. They never raised their voices when Oliver was home. That was the one consistent mercy in all of it, and I never knew whether to be grateful for it or more frightened by the level of control it demonstrated. That night, I sat at the table after they went upstairs and listened to my daughter clear the broken glass from around my chair. Each piece clicked against the dustpan. Craig paced behind her, giving instructions. "Make sure he doesn't change his mind overnight," he said. Renata said something too quiet to carry. He snapped his fingers. She went silent. That small gesture told me more about those 14 months than anything he had ever said aloud. I went upstairs at 9:30, closed my bedroom door, and lay beside the empty side of the bed where Pearl had slept. I listened to the house settle around me, the pipes ticking, the furnace cycling, a board creaking in the hallway. Then I heard Craig downstairs speaking in the smooth, rising voice he used when he believed a deal was nearly closed. "He finally understands. Tomorrow it's done." Renata answered something. Then she laughed. I knew that laugh. Pearl's mother had made the same sound for 43 years whenever her husband frightened her in a room full of people. Short, empty, produced precisely when it was expected, leaving nothing real behind it. I waited until their door closed. Then I went down to the basement, opened the bottom drawer of the filing cabinet, and sat on the steps beneath the weak yellow bulb with the folder across my knees. 2 months of evidence, and the beginning of a plan to use every piece of it in the right order. The next morning, I was in the kitchen before sunrise. Pancake batter, warmed skillet, Pearl's old blue mug full of coffee. By 6:15, Oliver came downstairs in mismatched socks and took his usual spot on the counter. He told me about a dream involving a dinosaur driving a school bus, and I listened and laughed where I was supposed to and wiped syrup off his chin with a paper towel. For those 20 minutes, I let him believe everything in the house was ordinary. Craig came down at 7:45 in a pressed polo shirt with the $40,000 watch already on his wrist. He had started wearing it every day after the money from my accounts cleared into his holding company. He called it a business investment. Everyone who saw it called it a statement about what he believed he was worth. "Big day, Pop," he said. I poured his coffee without answering. Renata came down in a beige sweater and sat in Pearl's chair at the table. She had avoided that seat for 11 years out of respect. That morning, she lowered herself into it, as if she were rehearsing something. "Daddy," she said quietly, "we're doing this because we want what's best for you." I called her sweetheart. Her fingers tightened around her glass. She had not heard that word from me since before she married him. For a single second, something moved across her face, the expression of a child who recognizes a version of herself she has almost entirely forgotten. Then Craig set down his mug with a sound that carried just enough weight to fill the kitchen, and the expression was gone. "Notary is waiting," he said. "Let's go." I picked up my coat and a plain brown paper bag from the counter. He noticed the bag but did not ask about it. That was his second mistake. Craig insisted on driving. I sat beside him with the bag on my knees while Renata followed in her own car. He kept one hand on the wheel and checked his watch at every red light, already calculating the afternoon. When I directed him down Sycamore Street instead of toward the notary's office, his jaw tightened. "That's not the way. I need to drop something off for an old friend. 2 minutes. It can wait." "It's on the way." He exhaled through his nose, the sigh of a man who has decided someone else's time is not worth respecting, and turned onto Sycamore. He pulled in front of a low brick building. He read the sign above the door. "Garrick Norwell and Associates, attorneys at law." "You said this was a friend's house." "He works here now." I was out of the car before he could say anything else. The receptionist smiled when I came through the door. I had visited the office twice a week for 2 months, and she knew my name without looking up. Garrick was waiting near the front desk. I handed him the paper bag, containing copies of the forged deed, the recorder with the study conversation, and the most recent bank statements, and he slid a document across the counter. "Once you sign at the notary's office," he said quietly, "we move." I signed his page, folded it carefully, and walked back to the car in under 2 minutes. Craig was on his phone when I got in. "Yes," he was saying, smiling. "By lunchtime, everything is ours." I placed the new bag between my feet and looked out the window. He never asked what it contained. The notary's office had the particular smell of a room where important decisions get made by people who are not always prepared for the consequences. Printer ink, stale coffee, a faint trace of anxiety baked into the carpet from years of visits like ours. Renata was already in the lobby, her purse held in front of her like something to hold on to. Craig spread the documents across the conference table with practiced efficiency. Quitclaim deed for the house, title transfer for my truck, durable financial power of attorney, and account authorization forms that would give him access to every account he believed held my retirement savings. He explained each page quickly, using words like simplified management and responsible protection and long-term security. And the notary repeated that I could take my time. And Craig said he understands, nodding in my direction as though I were not in the room. I looked at my daughter. Her hand was trembling beneath the edge of the table. "Is this what you want?" I asked. She glanced at Craig before she answered. She nodded. That glance told me everything I needed to know. I signed every page. What Craig did not know was that the accounts listed in those authorization forms contained only a fraction of what he was expecting. Garrick had helped me move the bulk of my savings 6 weeks earlier. What remained was enough to look convincing on paper. He also did not know that the deed, even fully signed, still required filing and acceptance by the county clerk before the public record changed. That process took time. Garrick had already filed an emergency petition disputing the transfer and placed a formal notice of contest against the property. The clock was running, but it was running in my direction, not Craig's. Outside the notary's office, Craig shook hands with the notary and clapped me on the shoulder. "See, Pop, that wasn't difficult." "No," I agreed, "it really wasn't." That evening, I suggested a dinner. "A celebration," I said. "The next chapter. I'd like to have a few friends over Saturday. Make it an occasion." Craig's face brightened so quickly, it was almost difficult to watch. He had been waiting for permission to display what he believed he now owned. "How many people?" he asked. "Maybe 12. Family, a few old friends." "I'll take care of the wine." "I'll handle the food," I said. "Pearl's pot roast." Renata looked up from across the room. That recipe was not ordinary in our family. Pearl made it only for Thanksgiving, Easter, and the night her brother came home from overseas. It carried a specific weight: rosemary and slow-cooked beef and the particular warmth of a house that has been lived in honestly for decades. Renata knew it. The sound of it moved across her face, the way a familiar piece of music moves through a room before anyone has time to put their guard up. Then Craig pressed his hand to her shoulder. The warmth left. Over the following days, I cleaned the dining room, polished Pearl's table, and asked Craig which tablecloth he preferred. He chose the white one. I used it without comment. I also made calls I did not announce. Garrick confirmed he would be there. Idle Morrison, a retired forensic accountant who had spent the previous 2 months tracing every dollar that had left my accounts, said she would arrive at 6:15 and introduce herself as a former neighbor. Detective Calvin Marsh with the Oklahoma City Police Department said he would wear the tweed jacket and be there by 6:30. And Warren Fielding, a senior examiner with the Oklahoma State Banking Department, said he was looking forward to the pot roast. Friday evening, Oliver helped me peel potatoes at the counter while Renata polished Pearl's silver in the next room. Oliver stood on the wooden stool Pearl had bought when Renata was his age. Every few minutes he held up a lopsided potato and asked if it was good enough. "They taste the same once they're mashed," I told him. He laughed, then his expression changed. "Why are you so happy, Pop?" The peeler stopped in my hand. Children see the things adults work hardest to hide. He had seen the broken glass swept up without explanation. He had seen the quiet meals, the way Renata watched the doorway when her husband walked in. He had seen more than anyone had intended him to see, and he had filed it away in the careful, uncomplaining way that children carry things they are not supposed to know. I dried my hands and knelt in front of him. "Do you remember the fishing cabin?" I asked. He nodded immediately. We had gone every August since he was 4, 2 narrow beds, a leaking porch roof, a lake so still in the mornings that the trees appeared upside down in the water. He caught his first fish there at age 5 and cried when I made him throw it back, then insisted we return the following summer specifically to apologize to it. "If anything happens tomorrow night, anything that frightens you, you go next door to Mrs. Hensley. She has my number on her refrigerator. You tell her you need to call Pop." His smile faded. "Are you going somewhere?" "Not without you." I placed both hands on his small shoulders. "And when I say it's time, we'll go to the cabin. Just us." He studied my face for several seconds with the serious, unhurried attention that children give to things they understand are important. Then he nodded once. "Okay, Pop." He did not ask anything else. The next afternoon, Mrs. Hensley collected him for her grandson's birthday. Renata barely looked up when he left. I watched his jacket disappear through the door and let myself feel just briefly the full weight of what I was asking a child to carry without explaining any of it. Then I went back to the kitchen and finished preparing the rosemary. The first guest arrived at 6:15. Garrick stepped onto the porch carrying his worn leather satchel, the one he had used since the year he passed the bar. When Craig answered the door, Garrick extended his hand and said he was an old friend of mine from the construction years. Craig shook hands without hesitation. Idle arrived 7 minutes later, introduced herself as a former neighbor, and accepted a glass of water from Renata without elaborating further. She was 64, sharp-eyed, and had spent 2 months with my bank records spread across her dining room table at home. Craig kissed her hand when she was introduced. Detective Marsh arrived at 6:30 in a tweed jacket that made him look precisely like the retired schoolteacher he was pretending to be. Craig studied him for a half second, decided he posed no threat, and moved on to greet the next person. Warren Fielding arrived last, introduced himself as a man I knew from church, and took his seat at the far end of the table. Craig's business associates arrived in a cluster just after 6:30, loud, confident, filling the hallway with expensive cologne and the comfortable laughter of men who believe the evening belongs to them. One of them looked around the dining room, took in the polished table and pearl silver and the candles Renata had lit without being asked, and slapped Craig on the back. "Nice place, brother. This yours now?" Craig smiled the way a man smiles when he has been waiting months to hear someone say exactly that. "Family property," he said. I was standing near the table, pouring drinks and remembering the morning he told me I was a burden on my own daughter in my own kitchen. Dinner was served at 7:15. The pot roast came out exactly right, tender enough to fall apart under the carving knife. Rosemary and onions filling the room the way they filled it every Thanksgiving Pearl was alive. I stood at the head of the table and carved while Craig poured wine, and his associates discussed the house's value and the view from the back porch and how much the kitchen might be worth updating. Oliver's chair was empty at my right hand. That was exactly as I had planned it. Craig stood and tapped his glass when the serving was finished. The room went quiet with the particular attentiveness of people who believe they are about to hear something worth remembering. He thanked me for being reasonable. He thanked me for understanding that families eventually require new leadership. He praised his own patience and judgment and used the word legacy 3 times in the space of 2 minutes. His associates raised their glasses. One of them congratulated him on the house. Another asked when renovations would begin. Craig smiled at me from across the table. "Soon," he said. "There are a few things here that could use updating." I set the carving knife beside Pearl's embroidered napkin. The small blue flowers at its corners had faded over the years, but they were still there. So was I. "I would like to make a toast of my own," I said. The room settled. I raised my glass toward Renata. To my late wife, to the home we built together, and to the child we raised in it. Then I looked at Craig. And to honesty, the one thing in this house I have never allowed anyone to take from me. His smile slipped, just slightly, just for a moment, but I saw it. I turned to Garrick. "Would you do the honors?" Garrick placed his napkin beside his plate with the unhurried calm of a man who has prepared for this moment across many weeks. He reached into the leather satchel at his feet and removed a stack of documents nearly 3 inches thick, which he set on the center of the table. The laughter stopped. Craig looked at the stack. "What is that?" "The property transfer signed 5 days ago has been formally challenged and temporarily blocked," Garrick said. "The evidence supports fraud in the inducement, coercion of an elderly homeowner, and financial exploitation." Renata's fork slipped from her fingers and struck the plate. Craig stood so fast his chair scraped the floor. He signed willingly. Everyone at the notary's office saw it. Garrick lifted a photograph from the stack. "Then perhaps you can explain this." The photograph showed the quitclaim deed from Craig's briefcase, my house, his holding company, and my name traced in pencil at the bottom. It had been dated 3 months before Craig ever mentioned managing my estate. Every face at the table turned toward him. Craig looked at the photograph, then at me. I did not look angry. I sat with my hands folded beside Pearl's napkin and waited. Before Craig could speak, Idle opened the folder at her place and began removing pages, arranging them across the table one by one. Each page showed account numbers, transfer dates, dollar amounts, and the names of companies no one in the room had ever heard. One of Craig's associates leaned forward to look. "What are those?" "Investor funds," Idell said. "Well, what remains of them?" Craig's voice rose. "Those are private company records. You have no standing to discuss them." Idell turned another page. Over the past 14 months, money from at least 6 investors was routed through a domestic holding company and wired to an offshore account. A portion of that money paid for a leased vehicle. She paused. A significant portion paid for other personal expenses, including a $40,000 watch. Every eye moved to Craig's wrist. He lowered his hand beneath the table. Idell set down another page. An additional $210,000 was placed into a cryptocurrency token that is currently under federal investigation for fraud. The table broke open. One of Craig's associates demanded to know where his capital had gone. Another stood and pointed across the table, accusing Craig of falsifying quarterly statements. The third, a broad man with a shaved head, who had slapped Craig's back in the hallway less than 2 hours earlier, brought his palm flat down on the table, hard enough to shake the glasses. Craig turned toward me. "This is your doing. You are a confused old man who does not understand how business works." That was his final mistake. Detective Marsh rose from his chair with the unhurried patience of someone who has been waiting for a specific moment and has finally arrived at it. He reached inside his jacket. "My name is Calvin Marsh," he said. "I am a detective with the Oklahoma City Police Department. This investigation did not begin tonight. The recordings, the financial records, and the forged deed were reviewed before anyone walked through that front door. Arrest and search warrants were signed this afternoon. I need everyone to remain seated." Craig turned toward the hallway. Through the curtains, 2 dark vehicles sat at the curb, their engines off. He took one step. Detective Marsh moved between him and the doorway. "Sit down." Craig sat. 2 officers entered through the front door. They were quiet, which made the moment feel more complete than any shouting could have. Detective Marsh collected the forged deed, the bank records, and the digital recorder from Garrick, then asked Craig to stand. Craig looked around the table one last time. His associates turned away or studied their plates. The man with the shaved head was already on his phone, speaking quickly and quietly, making it clear he intended to be on record as the first one to report the fraud rather than the last to discover it. "I didn't coerce anyone," Craig said. "He signed those papers." The notary watched. Garrick answered calmly. "After 14 months of threats, financial manipulation, and a forged deed prepared before the first conversation about care, we have it documented." Craig turned toward me at the door. "You did this." I met his eyes. "I served you dinner," I said. His mouth opened. Nothing came out. The officers walked him through the front door he had entered, believing it was already his. Through the window, I watched the car door close behind him. He had sat at my table and toasted his own victory. He left without the house, without the money, and without the silence he had been counting on. When the door closed, the room was very quiet. The remaining investors gathered around Warren Fielding and spoke in urgent, overlapping voices. One by one, they exchanged contact information and left with copies of Idell's report. Craig's brother-in-law, who had arrived with his associates and said almost nothing during dinner, slipped out without meeting anyone's eyes. Garrick and Idell stayed seated and gave Renata and me the room to face what was left. The pot roast had gone cold. Renata sat at the far end of the table, her shoulders forward, her face carrying the particular exhaustion of someone who has held a version of themselves together through force of will for a very long time and has finally stopped. Tears ran down her face without drama or sound. "What happens to me?" she asked. I placed both hands flat on the table. "That depends on what you choose next." I didn't know he was stealing from investors. "You knew he was stealing from me." She lowered her eyes and did not deny it. I wanted to reach across and take her hand immediately. I also wanted to ask why she had sat in Pearl's chair for 14 months while her husband dismantled the life Pearl and I had built, and had said nothing, and had watched, and had signed as a witness at the notary's table that morning. Both things were true at once. "You can stay here while you find your footing," I said, "in the guest room, not the master bedroom." She nodded without looking up. "And you will not be alone with Oliver for a period of time." Her head came up fast. "Daddy, I would never hurt him." "I know you love him," I said, "but love is not the same as safety when fear is running the house. Garrick has prepared a temporary guardianship agreement. You can sign it tonight, or a judge reviews the emergency petition Monday morning. Until a court is satisfied that things are stable, Oliver stays with me." She looked at Garrick. He gave her a steady, quiet nod. After a long silence, she said, "I'll sign." She pressed both hands over her mouth and cried harder. I let her. Then I placed the recorder on the table. "There is something you need to hear," I said, "before you decide anything about your own future." I pressed play. Craig's voice filled the dining room in the same smooth rising register it always used when he was selling something. His brother's voice asked about Renata. Craig answered, "She does what I tell her. If she becomes a problem, I will handle her." The recording had been made in my study while I sorted invoices 6 feet away and kept my eyes on the paper in front of me. Renata listened without moving. When it ended, she stared at the recorder the way a person stares at an object that has just spoken in a stranger's voice, using words they recognize from their own life. "He said he loved me," she whispered. "I know. He said it constantly. I know that too." She pressed both hands over her face. For years, she had explained away his anger, apologized for his behavior at family dinners, defended his temper to people who expressed concern. She had believed that loyalty was the same as love, and that if she made herself small enough and quiet enough and careful enough, the version of the man she had married would eventually return. Now she understood that version had never existed. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" she asked. "Because you would have warned him," I said, "and then I would have lost the house, the evidence, and possibly you." She looked at me, wounded, but she did not say I was wrong. I reached across the table and covered her hand. "Your mother would want you to have a real chance," I said. "So that is what I am giving you. Not because what you allowed was without consequence, but because I believe you can become someone Oliver feels genuinely safe beside. Someone who makes decisions based on what is true rather than what is easier." Her fingers closed around mine. "I don't know how to start." "You start by telling the truth," I said. "Then you accept the help that is offered. Then you make the next honest decision, even when it is hard. That is how it begins, and it begins tonight." Outside, headlights moved across the dining room wall. Mrs. Hensley's car was pulling into her driveway. Oliver was home. I stepped out onto the porch. October air, cold, dry, the smell of oak leaves and the first edge of winter. The kind of night that feels like a reset if you are willing to let it be one. Oliver climbed out of the car with a bag of popcorn in one hand and his jacket trailing from the other. The moment he saw me in the rocking chair, he dropped the jacket and ran across the lawn without stopping. He climbed into my lap as though he were 4 years old and the last 3 years had not happened. I wrapped both arms around him. "Is everyone gone?" he asked. "Most of them." He looked through the dining room window. Renata was still at the table, Garrick and Edel nearby. She lifted one hand when she saw him. He did not wave back right away. He leaned against my chest instead and thought about it. Children understand fear in their bones, even when no one has named it for them. He had spent months watching exits and reading silences, and knowing without being told that certain questions were better left unasked. "Is Mom okay?" "She is going to need time," I said, "and help, but she is safe tonight, you both are." He pressed his face against my shoulder. He smelled of buttered popcorn and the lavender soap Mrs. Hensley kept by her kitchen sink. After a while, he said, "Can we go to the cabin soon?" "Next weekend," I said, "if the weather holds." He nodded. "Can Mom come?" I looked through the window. Renata had stood up and was carrying cold plates toward the kitchen, moving slowly but moving. "Maybe someday," I said, "when she is ready." He accepted that without pushing further and rested his head beneath my chin. Behind us, my house was still mine, and the child in my arms was safe. For that night, that was more than enough. The investigation moved the way these things move, slowly, with a great deal of paperwork and patience required on all sides, but it moved. The forged deed, the recorded conversations, the 14 months of financial records Idel had traced, and the testimony of 6 defrauded investors gave prosecutors more material than they needed. Craig's accounts were frozen. The leased car was returned to its lender. The watch was taken as evidence. His firm collapsed before winter. The men who had arrived at my dinner table, boasting about his instincts and his leadership, testified in detail about false reports, fabricated returns, and promises he had constructed from the beginning with no intention of honoring. He accepted a plea agreement the following spring. Prison time, restitution ordered to investors and to me, a permanent bar from managing investment funds or fiduciary accounts, and an agreement enforced by the family court that he would have no contact with Oliver until a judge determined otherwise. My daughter filed for divorce the week after his arrest. That signature did not erase the previous 14 months. Healing does not arrive because a person signs a single document or weeps at a dining room table. Renata began counseling and attended every parenting class the court required. She found a part-time job at an accounting firm, which she chose, I think, because she had spent enough time in the presence of numbers being used dishonestly that she wanted to understand how they were supposed to work. Some mornings she still reached for her phone the moment it buzzed, then remembered. Trust returned in the way trust returns, not in a single moment, but through small, reliable choices made correctly over time. Oliver stayed with me. We made pancakes on school mornings and went to the cabin whenever the weather and his schedule allowed. In time, Renata joined us for an afternoon, then a full day. She did not ask to be forgiven. She showed up, and she kept showing up, which is a different kind of asking, and one I have more respect for. Pearl used to say that a clear head was the only honest weapon a person carried into a difficult situation. She was right. I did not confront Craig the day I found the forged deed in his briefcase, not because I was afraid, but because anger would have warned him. Patience gave me the time to collect the evidence, protect the accounts, bring the right people into the house, and make sure Oliver was across the street with the popcorn when the consequences arrived. Today, Oliver fills the hallway with muddy shoes and schoolbooks and the particular kind of noise a child makes when he is comfortable enough to make it. Renata is rebuilding her life one honest decision at a time. And the chair at the head of Pearl's table, the one Craig stood beside and toasted as though it belonged to him, is still mine. I earned it twice, once by building the life around it, once by refusing to leave it without a fight. If this story stayed with you, tell me in the comments. Would you have confronted him the day you found the forged deed? Or would you have done what I did, stayed quiet, filled the folder, and waited until the right people were sitting at the table? I would genuinely like to know. And if you want more stories about betrayal, survival, and the kind of justice that arrives slowly and lands completely, subscribe to the channel. There are more stories here waiting for you.